Great Wednesday, and welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Good to be with you on a Wednesday morning.
And same here. So, as we like to get started each day, before we get into our show, what's your spiritual energy number?
I'm at a 10. Didn't have to choose it, just there. Um, I have good energy around doing good work and fighting back against the forces of evil, which we'll talk about in today's topic. So yeah, my energy is 10.
I join you, being 10 myself. Like you, I choose it. There's definitely a lot of reasons that if I want to go down that rabbit hole, I can choose for not being a 10. And I could probably even justify, if I wanted to not be in a state of gratitude, I could justify being a one. I can give all the reasons why I should be a one. Part of what we're going to talk about today is to talk about what's kind of going on just from a macro standpoint of things I can control that's out of my circle of influence. And then, of course, on a micro level, there's a lot of things in my life uh, that is in my circle of influence. All those things can be weights to bring you down and you bring your energy down if you choose to. And like you said, I choose not to. I choose to be a 10 because I rather focus on the gratitude of my life, which is what I want to roll into my uh, as I move into the next section of our show. Been just being grateful for my life, my health, my ability to sit here, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Grateful for a mother who's still alive, but it's getting to be a kind of a selfish thing at this point. So that's something that wrestling, not really wrestling with, but I think I've come to terms with the choices and decisions around it has to be, and grateful to be at a place where that is. Mindset, maturity, just grateful to be able to come to that realization, and for my mom to have lived as long as she has, impacted the people that she has impacted, but has held on long enough for most people to get to the point that know her and love her, all coming to the same realization that this is what we're ready for that peaceful transition for her, so she can begin to, be in that space of just transition to spirit. And just grateful, like I said, to be at that place of thinking along those lines and having her be around for as long as she's been around. Grateful for, you know, really tapping into my purpose in life, and really getting clarity on how I want to live my next 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, 10 years, however long it may be, how I want to do that and what my purpose will be in doing that. And grateful for being able to connect with that and just really getting that clarity. One of my favorite songs uh, that I've always sing in my head when I'm tapped into that frequency and things seem to align, if I made some progress, is that, and I forget who the author is. I need to look it up, but it's a real popular song. The lyrics are, "I can see clearly now that the rain is gone."
Hmm.
And so when I have that kind of milestone or significant transition or a significant moment in my life, that song always comes to mind. And that's what I'm thinking of right now, just in my life and my purpose and just where I am. I can see clearly now. And that's such a good feeling, considering what I've gone through the last 5 years with COVID-19 in my business and where my business was going, and then how COVID-19 impacted my business and just those things, and just really being in a place now where I'm saying, I finally know. I'm at a knowing now, as opposed to I want, I hope, I believe, I'm working towards this. I have a knowing of where I'm doing and where I'm going. So that clarity is something I'm grateful for. So all that being said, it's impossible for me, once I go through that exercise in my mind, to feel anything less than being a 10.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'll jump into the gratitude moment as well. um, as always, indoor plumbing, a working refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it are blessings. Basic blessings that I just don't take for granted. I think I mentioned a few weeks ago that we had a problem. We rent a house on a really nice spot that we couldn't afford to buy, and there ended up being a problem with the well. There's a high iron content in the water, and something shifted underground, and all of our water was coming in really brown and dirty. And even though we have two sets of filters and a water softener that make the water drinkable, when this happened, even with the filters, it wasn't really safe to drink. So we didn't have safe drinking water, and we had to pick and choose if we were going to shower in it or not. You might come out dirtier than you went in. But it was just, I laugh about that because it was an inconvenience at best. But just, something as basic as safe water to drink and flush waste away with, and to bathe in, automatically step into a warm or hot shower. Really just grateful for that. I don't, have a roof over my head and heat in the wintertime. And then that I have, really good friends that I trust and who trust me, and I love and who love me. And I get to do work I care about. And as far as I can tell, even as my body has aches and pains, as I'm in the finishing my first year of my 8th decade. That's a horrible way to say I'm 70. But when you turn 70, it means you completed 7 decades and you're beginning your 8th. So that's what it is. And I have some, minor aches and pains, but I take pretty good care of myself. And I know that I'm blessed. So I'm grateful for all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we jump into our show, I just kind of want to explain something I think is important. I know you were joking, but I think that most people, I find that by choosing my latest background, I'm getting comments, and I just really wanted to explain when I say King and where I'm coming from with that. Not so much as my last name, but it's this book, and I'm gonna kind of paraphrase where it really clicked for me when I read this book. It's called A King Within, and so the premise is being king, and so the goal ultimately becomes not to be king, which after all, in the age we are living in the world, we don't want to be king in an ego mindset, but rather to be a generative man who accesses the king energy, empowers and inspires those around him. So it becomes more like a true north for me. Am I being king in that context, a goal to work towards, to tap into that king energy? I see myself as being that servant leader. That's what I'm saying earlier. So if you look at the logo, just describing the background, the crown is representing people, it's pillars of people, and coming together to build the love energy tribes, and that's where I'm focused on. And even you helped me along the journey, you and Kent, with the fully human dialogue and context. So that's what I have, fully human connections. That's what I want to have people to become, because I believe everything stems from your identity. And as you choose, and I choose to be fully human as my identity, then the world becomes a totally different place. Like putting on different glasses, literally being able to see clearly now with that kind of identity, as opposed to being about race, my gender, my sexual orientation, my job, my career, or anything else that labels that we're forced into. So just wanted to point that out. Kind of that's the purpose behind the whole king thing in that context. So with that being said, definitely walk us into our show topic today, please.
Yeah, so we're going to continue speaking about some of the content of the book, enough with the talking points, doing more good than harm in conversation. And we've spoken the last 2 weeks about knowing, the last 3 weeks, obviously, we weren't here last week, but just knowing yourself and your cultural givens, and who's really speaking when you speak, who's really speaking when I speak. Is it, a discrete, thoughtful, critical thinking human being, or is the culture speaking through me? So those are the things that we spoke about in our last two sessions. We want to look at today is the dangers of using obviously insults, but also using labels and sweeping generalizations and the damage that they can do. And I have some examples I want to use in today's episode. And I'm just going to start off with one example. So back in the times of Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, he began to refer to successful farmers, those who had pretty big farms and were pretty successful, where lots of people were starving and struggling in the cities. And it wasn't the fault of the farmers, it was the fault of the government for a lot of reasons. But he began to refer to them as pigs. And so right there, I mean, just the connotations that we have around pigs, even though they're relatively clean and they're smart animals, that's not the connotation. But what it implied back then was that, what do you do with a pig? Well, you want to have pork to eat. So pigs get slaughtered. So just the danger of language, of a label like that, and what it means, especially to non-self-reflective listeners. Oh, those people who are doing a good job with their farms, they're pigs. And we're struggling, they're bad and we're good. So that's a real superficial history of that time. It was horrible. It was much worse than I just made it sound. In the United States of America today, and literally today, and in the past couple of months, the President of the United States, people in his cabinet, some news commentators have begun to refer to members of the federal workforce, those people that run the federal government, as parasites. Now, parasite is typically a small, sometimes microscopic creature that feeds off of a host, something else, and usually makes it sick and infects it, and can even kill it. So comparing, I forget how many federal workers there are. I'm not going to make up a number, but there are quite a few, and they did everything from the FBI to the people who work at the IRS, to the Department of Motor Vehicles, to the Post Office, to the Department of Homeland Security, to the State Department, to everybody in the military. Those were all federal employees. And the language being used was calling them generally parasites. Now, I'm not going to go into the dangers of why would you do that? You're talking about your neighbors, the person that delivers your mail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what it does is it allows people who choose not to be self-reflective, or some reason can't be self-reflective, who don't read books, who don't read history, who don't know history, it allows them to begin to villainize a group of people. Oh, federal employees are parasites. But I don't know, my mail, the person that delivers my mail seems friendly. So what do I do with all that? Well, she's probably an exception. The rest of them are parasites. And we have to start, I'm glad that Elon Musk is firing them. Elon Musk, again, who's a South African native who became an American citizen, who's now in the White House with no official powers, firing federal workers. That's another conversation. But the language is really important. So to make that point even more cogent, I heard an interview yesterday from a woman who used to be the director of the federal agency that provided, let me see if I get the name of it exactly. It was basically the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. It was a fund set up for those firefighters, police officers, federal workers, construction workers, anybody, and people who lived in that area, in any of the areas where the planes hit and there were fires and lots of toxic things were exposed. who developed over a period of years cancers and other, especially respiratory diseases, based on being exposed for some days, weeks, months to the materials that made the trade centers, parts of the Pentagon, et cetera. Most of it was centered on the trade centers. And the federal government, like, it's not like that thing is in existence ongoing. It has to be renewed every X number of years. And no surprise, the Democrats in the federal government have always pushed to renew it. Someone like Jon Stewart, a comedian, had gotten involved in that, and he would go down there every time it needed to be renewed and testify in front of Congress with sick firefighters and people behind him. And so anyway, the woman that was directing that, her name is, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, it's an Indian name, Rupa Bhattacharya, I believe is correct. And she's no longer the director of that, but she did it for some years. She now works, she runs something at Georgetown University Law School. So she's an attorney by profession. But she had in her office, this is a federal government office, she directed her direct reports, whose job it was to carry out the orders of this statute to make sure that those who got sick because of their work around September 11th, 2001, got the compensation they deserved, and that anybody who was trying to fraudulently get money didn't get compensation. All right. And so they had like plaques in their offices, and it read, these 3 goals. This is a federal employee. This is who's now being called a parasite. Our goals are threefold. 1, to be fair to the claimants, those workers who got sick based on inhaling all the horrible stuff post 9/11. And that's been documented by doctors across the board, Republicans and Democrats, and everybody agrees. So it's not like, these first responders are trying to defraud the government or the construction workers. So first, be faithful to the claimants, or fair to the claimants. Be faithful to the statute. In other words, this was a law that was passed. So honor the law. Don't do more than the law says you can, but don't do less. And then the third one is be accountable to the taxpayers, because they're the ones that are funding this. So and people like that are being called parasites now, from the top of the American government, from the executive offices of the American government, and it's being shared by people in Congress and by news commentators. So that's really dangerous. There are, we can get some more examples, which I'm happy to do, but that's what we're talking about: avoiding labels, sweeping generalizations, and obviously insults. Well, to me, it's obviously not to everybody. So that's what we're looking at today in terms of doing more good when we open our mouths than harm. I'll be quiet now. That's another way to do more good than harm conversation is to shut up once in a while.
Well, having a self-awareness for you to think that way, I think it's critical and important. That's what's lacking today. So again, thank you for choosing another great topic for our show today. And when you send me the topic, just as listening to you now, a lot of thoughts, come to my mind as far as how I want to address this, my initial comments. And, what jumps out immediately, I would say more than anything else, is just really looking at the times we're in and watching the news, which I'm telling myself I'm going to start scaling back and watching less news, because I'm realizing how much of my mentality I'm giving control of to this media. And I get the game. It's a game. Mm. So, and I understand the moves. When you see it's a game and you understand it, then it definitely, for me, helps remove a lot of the taking the personal type of feelings about it. It's the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Don't take things personal has been one of those agreements. Mm. And it's so important not to, because it ties into thinking like a victim. You take it personal, then you put yourself as a victim status in context automatically, I believe. And understanding that the now what the entire plan is to do the things you're talking about. That's what they're being manipulative to do, is to create insults, is to generalize, is to create labels and use that because it feeds people's ego who they need to stay in power. And what I mean by that is the 75 million people who voted for Trump. That we can break them down into all kind of different groups, but to me, it got to the point where, and again, I've said it before, I wasn't happy with the Democrats were doing, bothered by the status quo as well. But by the same token, as a critical thinker, as a person who sees himself as a fully human individual who identifies as that, I couldn't very well, in my own conscience, vote for Trump just because I felt that I don't necessarily agree with the status quo when the Democrats were not doing enough of, or maintaining systems that I believe of white supremacy that are still in place, and then they're sustaining those as well. Because what Trump brings is a movement of folks who just relish or reverence in the joy of watching others suffer, and that's all they're getting out of it. And they still defend them to this day. And it's like, even though some people are beginning to, see the a different mindset, a shift in their mindset because of the fact that they're being personally impacted by it. So now it's like, oh, well, I didn't realize I was going to be caught up in that. So now, since I'm caught up in it, you need to stop this. We need to talk to our Congress people and tell he's moving to Elon is wrong. But as long as you thought other people were going to be the ones got cut, as long as you just thought it was DI programs, and you were that white male who didn't feel that you were going to be impacted by it, you was that happened. It needs to happen. So I say all that to say is I look at that as to sustain that they have to continue with the labels, generalizations, and um, insults, because that's all they're offering those individuals is that, well, I'm going to say what no one else has been saying. And this guy named Bakari Sellers, sure you've heard of him. He's a correspondent on CNN, I believe, and MSNBC, or maybe both. But he's also a political contributor, ran for office a couple of times. And he said, to me, one of the best quotes about white supremacy is a simple quote, a definition I would say about white supremacy. And I love coming up with simple statements that really encompass uh, a very loaded term like that, because a lot of people can, talk about how it doesn't exist anymore, it never exists, or whatever the case may be. But his definition was this. He says, when you look at equality as oppression, then that's white supremacy. So if you see that other people are going to be equal to you, and that equalness requires, and you view it as being oppressive to you, then that's white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is the crux of what his people believe who voted for Trump, and still defend him and Eli's actions as being something that's benefiting the United States. And that part, to me, is the part I hate, is that lying. It's like, I just wish you just be honest and just say, I'm voting for him because he is going to uphold the system of white supremacy that I want. I can respect that more, as opposed to saying, well, no, he's to defend him as being someone who's doing something in the best interest of the country right now. It to me is it's an insult to even come out of people's mouth to even try to defend that. How can you justify firing people who are anybody, whether government workers or any person who's employed, and just saying the day of, you're fired today? And not only you're fired today, but you have to get out of here right now. Your email's locked. You don't get. I mean, just treat them like they've done something wrong, and treat people who've been there for years or who've been there for months. It's just inhumane to even do that. And for people to still, for political reasons, still say try to justify this as necessary or maybe wrong, but it has a greater goal down the end, you know, to me, are just people who I find very difficult. And I wrap this up by saying this: that I find very difficult not to want to insult, and label,
Yeah.
because I see nothing but evil actions there. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, one of the good things about my putting that book out back in 2020 was I had to walk my talk, because I mean, I grew up in New York. I yell at people. I'm pretty good with profanity, and I know it. I mean, I'm laughing. I know it doesn't do any good, but my reptilian brain stem, the things I would like to say directly to Musk and Trump and Johnson and others, yeah, but it does no good, because that's where they live. I mean, they can. Trump and Musk especially are of a developmental worldview and a personality type that they can't be shamed. They can't be shamed. You can't make them feel ashamed. So shaming certain people you can shame, and then and I hate to say it that way, but if they do something really wrong, you put it out there in front of them, and they realize it, and they can be shamed, and they can kind of turn a corner and maybe, make amends or reparations or apologize or whatever. You're never going to hear an apology or get any kind of an amendment in that sense of the word from a Musk or a Trump. It's not going to happen. But I want to come back into the language piece. I love that you said that the way, firing people was inhumane, because in fact, that's what part of this current regime is doing, is to dehumanize people. Stalin called them pigs. Trump calls them parasites. So that's a dehumanization. They're not even human. So I want to pick up on one other thing that you said, because it's another great example of this. And it points to, I'm hesitant to say like what the greatest danger of this current administration or regime is. There's something, because, it's all bad. But the language that's, I've written about, and you and I have spoken about for a few years now, and lots of people have written about it and spoken about it. But it's at the foundational elements in the early pages of Project 2025, which was written by, a group of people from the Christian right. They've been working on it for years. But it's an in their language, anti-woke, anti-DEI policy. I mean, it's 900 pages, so it's not just that, but that's foundational. It's against the language they use. It's the socialist, liberal, woke, something. I don't have it in front of me, but that's they just categorize it's people who want to make sure everyone has health care. It's not funny, but that's the type of thing they're against. So I want to point to what happened last weekend, maybe a week and a half ago now, with the Trump loyalist who was eminently unqualified for his position, a guy who spent less than a decade in the National Guard and did see combat, to his credit. But Pete Hegseth, who was a Fox and Friends, host on late night on weekends, he wasn't that good at it, has an Ivy League degree, served in the National Guard. Now he's the Secretary of Defense of the United States. I mean, look back at every Secretary of Defense in our lifetime. He's still least qualified by far. Right? And a couple of weeks, a week and a half ago, he fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General, 4-star General, and I always forget his full name, but it's CQ is how he goes by, Brown Jr. He was an Air Force fighter pilot, decorated, rose up through the ranks, was appointed within the last 6 years or so to be the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and then he was promoted to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So Hegseth had written about wanting to get rid of him because he referred to him as a DEI hire who was more concerned with woke than with the military. So this is a guy from the National Guard who served for under a decade, talking about a 35 or 40-year veteran who rose up through the ranks. And then he also fired 2 women, the head of the Navy and the head of the Coast Guard. They're getting replaced by Trump loyalists, Trump appointees. And so the news media is speaking about this as a DEI woke thing. Oh, there's a black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's talking about diversity in the military, and he's not really a warrior. He just wants to make sure the military accepts women and blacks and gays and all that. That's the general message. It's all about DEI and being woke. And that's important. And it would be great if that's what this were. If it were only, and I'm saying only in quotation marks, because that's a really big deal. But several months ago, Donald Trump said, I want to have generals like Hitler had generals. That's not exactly how he said it, but it was, I want Hitler's type generals. That's the gist of it. You can find that online. You can find it in any news source. Probably Fox didn't run it that way, but because they protect him. And Hitler's generals, and if you read the history, once Hitler really got into power, the generals were no longer loyal to the German Constitution. They were loyal to Hitler. In fact, the Constitution disappeared. They were loyal to Hitler. So what Trump is doing is he's removing people who took and meant an oath of office to the United States Constitution. Now I'll go back to General C.Q. Brown Jr. As the primary example, but he's not the only one, and replacing people like him with people who are loyal to Trump. And Hegseth also fired some of the JAG officers. Those are judicial advocate general, judge advocate generals. Those are the military lawyers and judges in the military. And my language right now is a little bit shaky. He fired a bunch of them, and he basically said, we need people in place who won't get in the way as we change things. That's a paraphrase. So what's being presented as getting woke and DEI people out of the military and out of the military justice system in this country, and there's some of that is true. It's basically replacing them with loyalists to the president who will be loyal to the president and not the Constitution. And that's how any place where there was a democratic system in place that fell to fascism or Nazism or communism or any other type of autocracy, that's always been one of the traits, where the people who are close to the leader are loyal to the leader, to the person, and not to the nation. So that's, that idea of just throwing out woke and DEI as the reasons for this are convenient scapegoat uses of language, because MAGA Republicans have been conditioned by language like getting rid of the woke mind virus. That was how Ron DeSantis ran for president. It's still bandied around throughout the country, the woke mind virus. Referring to anybody who's not white, heterosexual, and male as a DEI hire. And if you ask many people, I want to say the majority, but I haven't done research, so I can't say a majority, but virtually every time in conversation, in a classroom or in a Zoom call or in a debate, when somebody has used the word woke or the woke mind virus or the word intersectionality, because they've heard about that, I always ask them what they mean by the word woke.
Right.
The vast majority of people that I ask can't define it. They don't know what it is. So they're just repeating a label that was given to them by people they think they can trust, and they don't even know what it means. Um, and so that's the real danger of a label, a sweeping generalization. Oh, that's just the woke mind virus. That's just the liberal socialist agenda, and you just sweep away. Well, what is the liberal socialist agenda basically? And the last thing I'll say, because I know I'm going on here, but one of the best things about language like the liberal socialist agenda and being too woke is that there's one member of the United States Senate right now, and there's a number of them. My own Senator Chris Murphy is doing a great job speaking out and really harassing what's going on. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from Queens, New York, is doing a great job. But there's a guy flying around the countries speaking to Republican people who are concerned now about what Trump is doing, is a self-proclaimed socialist. Bernie Sanders is playing to packed houses across the middle of the country. So, yeah, there's the label. Bernie Sanders is socialist. He wants universal health care. And he's the loudest voice out there protesting against what's happening to the federal employees and lots of other people, who are being hurt by these policies. So the labels are just distractions and really dangerous, because the federal employees are not parasites. I was going to finish that up with saying like somebody who might be a parasite, but that would be my own mistake. Just to say that Elon Musk has received at least $38 billion in U.S. government subsidies for between Tesla and SpaceX. Those are subsidies. That's not the money he's made. That's money you and I gave him to help his businesses. So
Right.
who's the parasite? I mean, I could use money. Could you use $1 billion to help your business? I could use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and mine is way more valuable than Tesla is, or X, or even SpaceX. Sorry to say, what I do is more valuable than any of those. I'm not saying they don't have value, but as an educator and a writer and a poet and a coach, I help people directly. So again, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but we're talking about labels and sweeping generalizations and their dangers, and it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. Okay.
Well, again, the sad thing about it, you talk about Bernie Sanders now having people come, fill out packing town halls. See, what I've learned is, what seems to be pretty consistent, like I would say, like shifts in the stock market every 7 years. It's not always 7 years, but it's a pattern that happens pretty much around each time there's progressive moves made, advancement for equality. If it's a significant one, so for every big step that's made, there's a pushback to that. I've been listening to so many people talk about how they want to define. That's why I say I got to push myself away from it, because it is addictive to get caught in these rabbit holes of listening to different people who I respect about their opinion. As others, I want to hear a different perspective. How people resonating and receiving and thinking through this process of what's going on. I'm generally curious about that. And as you say, listen to how many people actually use the strategy of labeling and generalization and insults to make their point. And it's a quote that came to my mind and I'm going to butcher it because I need to go back and research and write it down, because now I realize it's a quote that I want to incorporate into my thinking. But basically, the premise was, if you have to respond with insults. Like when you're in dialogue with someone, and someone comes back, pushes back against your argument with facts, you can have a conversation, which is what the whole premise of your book is. What we're talking about. But when somebody double down on their perspective and they respond with insults or generalizations or labels to your facts, then that's where ignorance is there. That's where that person's showing their ignorance and their unwillingness to be even growth minded. Like the only reason they're entering the conversation with you is to teach you something, to give you their perspective. They're not entering into a conversation to communicate, to communicate. They're not doing that. So now, with that being said, just looking at how, again, people are processing what's going on with all the hate and vitriol, going back to the cycle I was talking about. See, Trump is a result of Obama. I think a lot of we talked about before. You talked about several in your book, and we talked about on previous podcasts. The right Christian right that wants to hold up the current system of having a white Christian government ideology, and also what their agenda is. When they saw Obama win, that was just like, wow, we got to do something about that. We got to make sure that doesn't happen again, because of that doesn't fit our model. That doesn't fit our ideology. That's going to break our systems. So we got to make sure that doesn't happen. So Trump was created for that. A lot of people were saying, well, Trump's not to blame and Trump's this. And I hear those different perspectives. But see, what Trump to me provided was someone who was, as they say, unapologetically evil. Like Bush still, you can say what you want to say about Bush. I'm talking about Bush Jr. You know, you can say what you want to say about him, but you still can see that he still has some moral decency. He still has some things he was not just not gonna come out and just be evil. Yeah, he came out and they used him for an agenda to come out and be president, but you didn't walk away feeling like he was just truly an evil man. You might disagree with some of the actions he's done, but you still can see the humanity in him. At least I believe that. Where I don't even see that in Trump or Elon at all. They're like you don't see any humanity in them and any empathy at all, any caring at all, any kindness at all. And that's the part for me that's scary. So the pushback, the backlash to Obama winning, people wanted to see someone who would step up, take the reins, and say, like one of the things Trump said the other day in the interview, they asked him, well, who's responsible, or are they carrying out your wishes? With Elon Musk with the firing and things of that nature. And he said, yeah, they carrying out my wishes. And he stood on that. That's what they wanted. Trump represents that. I'm going to be that person that's going to buck the system or make sure I show that the system works the way it's designed to work. As I said before, he's the epitome of white supremacy. And when you create that image and you create that movement he's created, you create the environment now where everybody talks in labels, everybody talks in insults. It has to go back and forth. And it's difficult to try to navigate a path of positiveness when they're showing you that what we thought to be, and again, from what I studied studied throughout school and learning about social studies, learning about politics, learning about the government, how it was created, what democracy is, and all these things I learned, and just to see that all it really took was someone to say, ah, I don't believe that. I'm not accepting that. And he has to be, again, a white man. No one else can do what Trump is doing. That's not white. That's not a white man. No one can do that. We have to be able to at least agree on that he's showing you that what we looked at as being the democratic system he's bigger than that. It doesn't apply to him. And that the worst part about it is that there's people, Again, 75 million people who believe that he's just in doing that because they voted for him. And you can't say, well, I voted for him because, well, maybe take this statement back. Because I actually believe that everybody, my ego, my cultural givens, my identity, when I look at myself as a black man, tells me what everybody who voted for Trump is uh, hates equality, hates other people having equality. They don't want that. And that's my initial reaction. But then I've actually talked to black friends of mine who are not obviously pro Trump, but found logic in that some of the things he said that they wanted to give him a try. Now they didn't vote for him, but they weren't mad that he won.
Mm.
And that to me shows me just how much this propaganda machine the media does to control people. I mean, these are people who I consider to be close friends. Like one person even posted a whole bunch of programs that, you know, was under US aid that were just silly programs. They just putting that on their Facebook posts and saying like, well, at least these need to be cut, and they justify the logic in that as though they don't understand that Elon's reason for choosing that was not because he truly cared about those programs. It's because they came at him. That the FAA and all these other folks he's cutting and firing are his retribution for attacking him or stopping him from exercising his company's agenda and being able to put his products and move like he wants to without any kind of pushback or any kind of regulation. And that's the real reason. But for folks not to be critical thinkers enough to think beyond the rhetoric, like Trump has been brilliant for that from day one when he came out and said fake news. Because so many people in my world, I don't know if it was talked about on a larger level, but definitely in my circle of influence, always felt that news has been fake, that the media has been biased. I mean, going back from uh, Noam Chomsky talking about manufacturing for consent, we always understood that the media was biased and had an agenda. Then Trump put that out there, so people resonate and agree with that. Yeah, he's right. Media is fake. He even tried to say he coined the expression. So what he's a master is manipulating. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the quote I was going with. That's why I said so many thoughts are flooding my mind now. Uh, Someone said that once you see yourself as a victim, you are easily manipulated.
Mm.
And that's where I think Trump has tapped into that logic. That a lot of people see themselves as a victim because of white supremacy. They see equality coming. They see themselves being oppressed. And so now they're being manipulated by what the rhetoric Trump and them is doing. And they're not even careful about it. Like slashing Medicaid. You know, most people don't want Medicaid slash. I don't think any blue collar worker in America felt that. Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm mad about is we need too many people are benefiting off Medicaid, so let's slash Medicaid. So that's kind of where my mind is. I'm still really processing just how me going forward, and this is the question I want to move to you as we begin to uh, move on with our show, navigating how best to process this information, maintain our decorum of being a critical thinker, being fully human, and not letting ourselves, as I like to say, excuse the expression if people are offended, but I wrap up what I'm saying is this. If my neighbor next door to me is shoveling shit in my yard, and every day I look out there and I see a pile of shit just getting bigger and bigger, and I respond by going and getting a shovel and then shoveling shit back over the fence to his yard, I've allowed my neighbor to now make me a shit shoveler. And I see myself being above being a shit shoveler is where I'm going with that. So how do people not let themselves, because it's so easy to get into the muck and say, I want to shovel shit too, because shoveling shit is a culture we're in right now. How do we stay away from allowing ourselves to, because what people don't realize is that when you accept that you are vibrating at a lower energy, that's the consequence. That's the damage you're doing to yourself. So how do we navigate? I know I said a lot there.
Well, that's an easy question. Well, there's just so many things. I mean, the complexity of what's going on right now is significant, and there are so many things. So I'm going to answer the question and give my sense of it, but I want to begin it with a short quote from Professor Timothy Snyder. He's a Yale University historian, and his area of expertise is, in fact, European history. So he's not a professor. His research isn't done in American history per se, but in fact in European history. So he understands a much longer scope of history than American history represents, because American history is only 250 years old, not even quite that, if you count from 1776 forward. So this is a quote from his book, 2017 book, entitled On Tyranny. It's just two short sentences. Quote, Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. One advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. That's again from Timothy Snyder and his book On Tyranny. Now, I love that quote, those two sentences, but the scary part about that is the now he was referring to was 8 years ago. So the book came out 8 years ago. He means he wrote that probably 9 years ago or even longer ago, because books don't suddenly come out. And he wrote that, the book was published in the first year of Trump's presidency. And it was a warning against what Trump represented. And we have the second iteration of it now, and it's really bad. So one thing I would suggest is get familiar with how democracies have died in the past. Snyder's book On Tyranny is a great one to take a look at. And that gives you actually things to do, basically 20 lessons, 20 things you can pay attention to in your personal life. All right, to fight back against tyranny. And tyranny is here. It's not coming. It's in its early stages. It's here. Another book is How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. But both of them, there are many, many more. Those two I think are important. But the biggest one is to, and you refer to this all the time, is to think for yourself. My way of saying that would be remain curious and skeptical, not cynical, like nothing is true. Because a great quote from Hannah Arendt from 1951 in her book on totalitarianism, or the origins of totalitarianism. And this is a paraphrase. I'm going to butcher it, but I'll get the idea of it. Communism, Nazism, fascism didn't succeed because there were people waiting for those types of regimes to take hold, like who were loyal communists or loyal Nazis. They succeeded because large swaths of the population were exhausted by a barrage of information that they couldn't tell what was true and what was not true. They felt helpless because they didn't understand anymore, and they just either didn't push back or they went along with it. Now, she said it way better than I just said it. But that's what's going on now. So remain vigilant. Question what you hear. Just because it appears, don't take any of your news from social media. Facebook is not a journalistic enterprise. X is not a journalistic enterprise. Instagram is not a journalistic enterprise. And there's lots of other social media things that I don't use. Rely on journalistic institutions that have had journalists working for decades. I don't say trust them outright, and read more than you listen. Because if you listen to the television news, what you're listening to is reduced down to sound bites so they can get it out in between corporate advertising. If you read a paper like the New York Times, it's not a fake paper. It's really not. In fact, since Bezos bought the Washington Post, the Times is probably one of the most reliable sources. They're not perfect, but they have some of the best journalists in the world working for them. They're not the only ones. But read your news, because if you read your news, you can take your time. You can select what to read and what to omit. If you watch television news only, you're being fed what corporate advertisers, through their dollars, approve to be broadcast. So read more, read books, do some research. What would be good history to know? And there's just so much more. I mean, around, we haven't even mentioned development, but the last thing I'll say in terms of what to do, you said twice today, maybe 3 times, that some people only got concerned about what Trump was going to be doing when it directly affected them. They didn't care when it didn't directly affect them. And that's the difference between a me-centric, an us-centric, or an all of us-centric view of the world. I'm not a federal worker, and I never have been one. I care deeply about what's happening to the people working in the federal government right now. I mean, I care about myself, but my view of the world is such that I don't want to see other human beings suffer.
Right.
And they're suffering now. So those who are only worried about Trump's attacks on democratic process because it affects them personally, they need to learn a little bit more about taking care of others. It's all of us, all Americans at least, all humans at best. So, that's my sense. Be curious, read more, and care about what happens to other human beings. I could talk for like hours on that.
Well, no, I appreciate that. That's wonderful advice, and that's the kind of direction I was looking for, because I believe that's the people who listen to our show. Again, unlike the other media podcasts out there that just give you gloom and doom and just trying to get clicks, we want to have you listen to our show, do critical thinking, and then give you some action steps. We want to present to you what the challenges and the problems are, but from a fully human perspective, say, here are some possible solutions, directions. So if you want to stay in that, if you want to stay connected to that journey and choose that identity, then this is how you can proceed. And for me, that's what keeps me sane, because I see so many other people losing their minds in various ways. This is where mental health comes in very importantly, But as we wrap up today's show, I want to, have our opportunity also in keeping with here's a path forward, is to point out what we believe are people who have shown examples in the past of being fully human, the behaviors, the characteristics, or currently showing those behaviors and those characteristics. And today I'm going to choose somebody that we both know. And I know I've said his name before at previous shows, but we've done so many shows that I'm sure that not everyone has heard our shows, so they wouldn't catch the repeated reference. But I think it's important to point his name out again, so I want to lift him up. And that's Kent Frazier. And I say that because, like I said, for a variety of reasons, but the reasons that come to mind today why I'm choosing him is me being grateful for being connected to you and all that I've learned through our many conversations that we've had, and proving to me that choosing to be fully human is fulfilling an intrinsic value level, because I've grown, growth minded, I've matured, and that he, as we like to say in the real estate world, he was a procuring cause of that. He helped put me on that journey. Conscious capitalism, that's what him and I both had in common. That was the reason we connected. But conscious capitalism didn't take it to that level. It's like got my attention, but to get me moving and to keep me focused and to give me purpose with clarity being fully human has been that goal, and that choosing as identity has been key. And all the different materials you share with me, and just when I talk to Kent, I listen to him. When he joined our podcast last, and just his his perspective, how he sees the world, even though I know that he's dealing with a lot of things personally that he doesn't even share, but I can see the pain in his face and how he's navigating that and still wakes up and still chooses to be a 10 and still chooses to be a person that wants to do good in the world and be fully human and create value. That to me is someone that is the living personification of being fully human.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, Kent's a good friend. So I'm also going to repeat someone, and I actually mentioned him earlier today in this podcast. And that's Bernie Sanders. I don't know if he's got to be, I think he's 80 something, or he's right on the cusp of 80. He's around the Trump Biden age area. And first thing that I'm just amazed at is his energy level. Getting into going to the Senate, doing voting things, getting on a plane, traveling out to, I don't know if it was in Wisconsin or Iowa or both of them, talking to like 1,000 people in a big room, and then getting back on a plane, getting back to either DC or back to his home state. And he has been consistent in his message about using government for taking care of all American citizens for decades. And he's passionate about it, and he doesn't go with the tides. He has this consistent message about taking care of the American people, not just the 1% or even the top 10%, but all of us. And the Democratic Party, missed an opportunity. Not whether he would have won or not, I don't know, but missed an opportunity for honoring the primaries back in 2016 and allowing him to become the candidate. And many Republicans back then who didn't like Trump, who were really very much against Trump, began organizations basically saying Republicans for Trump, for Sanders, or Republicans for Bernie is what they were willing to support Bernie Sanders rather than Donald Trump as Republicans. And they just didn't like Clinton for a variety of reasons. And I'm not insulting her when I say that, but the Democratic Party manipulated the primary, and Bernie Sanders got a really raw deal. And I think, again, would he have beat Trump in 2016? I don't know. Nobody would ever know that. We'll never know that. But he cares about the American people. How many Republican senators go and talk in blue districts when people are concerned about something? I've never heard of that before. And he's not a Democrat. He's he used to be a Democrat. He's now an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats because he's way closer to their value system than to the Republicans. So Bernie Sanders.
I agree. Bernie Sanders is a person who I would vote for and who I would campaign for. And, probably the only politician I could think of who runs for president that would have me inspired to be active and engaged in the whole democratic process. So that's a great choice. Thank you for choosing that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up today's show, again, thank you all listening audience for those who hung out with us longer than our normal. We know we've gone over a little bit, a lot to cover. Again, Reggie, thank you for being present, choosing a topic, writing a book. It's important. And that's why I'm glad that we're having these discussions right now, because understanding how to communicate, as you say, enough of the talking points, the title of your book, now is even more critical than ever before, because we have to begin to build bridges with these individuals who voted for Trump, who I said I would never want to work with. But at the same time, that's ego. That's us versus them, as you said before. And we got to be able to look beyond and see the bigger goal to say we restore our country back to its values, because what's being created is something that's not going to be beneficial for anyone. So thank you all for listening. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all continue to be more fully human.